Hello and welcome to Glitch Cube. We are a gaming podcast, and each week we take a deeper look into the art of video games. As always, I'm Christian.
And I'm Chris.
And thank you for joining us again as we travel once again. Yeah, sure. As we travel around the world, our next stop, we are still in South America, but we are heading over to Brazil. Last time we chatted a little bit about Brazil, saying how big their gaming industry is, and we felt it only right for them to have their own episode because there's a lot to this. Not just the games that they make, which are amazing, but the history behind the games and the choices that are being made by game designers themselves. It's all very fascinating stuff, and we are really excited to dive into this stuff, or dive into Brazil with you guys. Now, when people think about Brazil, they think a lot about, like carnival, festivals, like crazy, elaborate costumes, beautiful, like colors, all that fun stuff. But there is a slightly darker side to Brazil. Brazil is, it's impoverished, right? It's being monitored a lot for the imports that come in and out of Brazil. There's a lot of struggles that the people go through, and maybe that's why a lot of their games and the events that they hold are so big and elaborate, is to have that sense of escapism. And it can be seen in their games. Their games are gorgeous. They're so fun. They go into these amazing imaginary worlds and just explore and just thrive, right? And one of the big things that we notice in games in Brazil is their expertise behind pixel art. And that is a very common thread and something that we will definitely be chatting about a little bit later in the episode as well. But before we start really diving into the games and the history behind the games, I want to kind of set the stage a little bit for Brazil, right? Brazil is very interesting as far as how advanced it is with some of the cultural practices. Like, for instance, sex changes in Brazil are free, which is a insane concept, right? Especially for us here in America, where we are now in talks of, actually some of the bills have been passed already, of it being a felony or potential life sentence to assist transgender teens, right?
Oh yeah, the parents and stuff.
Yeah, so it's kind of crazy to think about that juxtaposition there, or even the fact that Brazil was the first army to actually allow women to enroll. So they were very progressive as far as that goes. And another crazy fun fact that I learned about Brazil while doing research for this is that prisoners are allowed to lower their sentence by 4 days for every single book they read in jail. That's pretty cool. We do have here where you can actually get a college degree in jail, but there's nothing saying that it's going to lower your sentence, right? But this kind of really comes all together whenever you think about the education system in Brazil. A lot of people don't have a high school education, so they are pushing for that in some way, right? And the best way to do that for them is in a controlled environment. Well, you're in prison and you want to get out a little earlier, well, here you go. Here's an option. If you lean more towards the education side of things, then you could potentially benefit society better when you come out. So that's kind of the whole goal that they're trying to go for. While they are very progressive, they are less progressive in a lot of other ways. For instance, with game imports, and not just the games, but the systems, what businesses are doing, or what companies are doing business with Brazil and all that. And it's been since the beginning, since Atari. It's a pretty crazy history. But I think that you probably have a better understanding of some of the embargoes and all that fun stuff that Brazil had to go through in order to get games just to live in Brazil, to be playable, right? To make it part of their culture. So why don't you give us a little rundown on that?
So, kind of to start things off, I couldn't find if this law is still in effect, but for most of all of the life of gaming with consoles and everything, there was a law in place that consoles had to be made in the country. They couldn't import it because they had to be built there. So it would drive costs.
I think that is still in place.
It still is.
Yeah, because I think the PS3 was licensed out to some companies in order to make it. So like the boards were sent, but then something else was made. I think, or they're finding workarounds.
That's a good point, because I did see because if you wanted to buy a PlayStation 4 brand new out there with the warranty, it's over $1,000 in US money.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I'm going to go back in time and talk about the beginnings, but just to put in perspective of the cost is that, even now people will buy an open box to get it pretty much for the price that we pay here. But going back to the days where I think Atari was kind of the first beginning of the home console generation in Brazil, which, I mean, you can say the same here, but I feel until Sega got its claws into Brazil, a lot of the PC gaming for the era, like the ZX Spectrum and MSX, were really the only things until Atari came in. And even then, it kind of ended in the late 80s, right? When Nintendo was around. And the big problem with Nintendo is that there wasn't really a representative out there.
Mm-hmm.
So they had a presence with their games, right? But you didn't really see actual NESs around. Because of the cost and because of Nintendo not really working with the country, people have to make clone systems. And pretty much a clone system is the same thing as a normal system, but with some differences, right? It's going to run a little differently. Sometimes it can run better. Sometimes it can run worse, because it is different hardware. And that kind of, especially for Nintendo, you saw almost a clone system for everything, I think, up until maybe the GameCube. But the NES, Super NES, I think I couldn't find really anything on the N64, which it's kind of interesting. I couldn't find that, but
I would imagine they probably did the same thing.
I think so. For the NES, it was the Phantom System, and for the Super Nintendo, it was the Dynacom and Dynavision 2, which, it's because they were able to clone it, it was also a little bit easier for people to make games for it, because since you have the hardware, you can obviously create the games for it. So we were starting to see these clone systems either able to play ROMs or people able to make custom games for it, which you couldn't really do on an actual Super Nintendo, right? Because I had the little security thing in it. But something that I found interesting is that the Master System, which was the Sega version of the NES, right? Their 8-bit platform, didn't really do well out here in the States, did well almost everywhere outside of the States, surprisingly. Europe, it was pretty successful. But in Brazil, it was probably the most successful, to the point where they were still making Master System 3s in 2008. And you have to think, the first time the Master System came out, I think, was 86 or 87.
Yeah, didn't it get discontinued in the 90s?
Very early. In the United States, yeah. I think it was discontinued as soon as the Genesis came out.
Yeah, so 92-ish or something like that, right? I think.
Yeah. And it's interesting because in Brazil, this company called Tectoy handled all of Sega's stuff. They originally started out as a company, toys. But they quickly realized that, hey, we want to bring games over because we see it's a business that isn't really being taken advantage of in the country, and they did, and they were very successful with it. And they actually created some really interesting things with the Master System itself, right? So they made different versions. They had the Handy, they had which was a console on chip, like they did later on in the life of it, especially like in the 2000s. They started making clone systems of the Master System, which include like over 100 games on one chip. Kind of like what we see now with like the NES Mini, or even, you know, the At Games arcades, where it's like, oh, here's 100 games on a little like console that you can play at any time, right?
I found that really fascinating, actually. Sorry to cut you off, but like a lot of the early cartridges that they did, especially with like Atari and Nintendo and all that, whenever they were making them, it was a lot of cartridges that had multiple games on them. And actually, one of the cool cartridges that I saw was one that had switches on it. And depending on the it had two switches, A, B, C, D, right? And there's 4 different games. And depending on how you had the switches like pressed, so if you had like A and D flicked, then it would play game number 3 or whatever it was, right? So they had some really ingenious designs as far as that went, but it was a lot of combo cartridges, right? It's very interesting to see that. And I'm sure it has to do a lot with the fact that there wasn't a lot of money that the consumers could spend on these things. So they had to find ways to give them more for their dollar, right? And like really make it seem like a valid purchase at that time. Or this might be the only cartridge that someone could buy for years. So allowing them to have multiple games on one cartridge just to get games out there, you know, is a very fascinating idea.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, after those consoles lived their life, they did this for the Mega Drive, which is Genesis in the US. And something I found really fascinating about this is that obviously they were still kind of making games for these consoles in the 2000s, right? Long after they're long dead and gone, right? In the 2000s for Sega, we had the Dreamcast. And to think that they were still making Master System and Genesis games, it's crazy. I think the two that I found that were most interesting were included on one of those consoles with, you know, over 100 games. There was a Guitar Hero that worked on the Genesis.
Really?
Yeah, and it's fascinating because I couldn't. There's no like guitar controller to it though. And then Need for Speed, which actually looks kind of good from like the little footage that I've seen. There's not much on it because obviously not many existed. But you have to think this came out when the PS2 was around. So basically you're playing like a PS2 game on a Genesis.
Wow.
And it's not 3D. I mean, it kind of is, but it's kind of not. You know, it's that kind of like highly pixel. Like it's very interesting to look at. And I mean, they even did stuff where Street Fighter 2 was on the Master System, which, you know, and everywhere else it came out on like the Genesis or Super Nintendo. So it's really fascinating how they made games work on platforms that were easy to get a hold of. And it's honestly kind of like, it's a bummer that these consoles are so expensive over there, because it's like you want everyone to be able to play and enjoy these, like, you know, just how everyone else does, you know. And but them making these like easier to get for people, it's cool, you know. Like normally, like you can't just go into a Best Buy out there and buy a console because it's so expensive. So they have like gray markets where you can buy clone systems, you know, and play games a much cheaper route. Yeah, especially if it's open box.
Right.
And, I mean, it seems like it still is like that to this day, which is interesting. Honestly, it's really fascinating too that Nintendo didn't make its presence in there until maybe like the early 2000s, and then they pulled out and didn't actually come back until 2020.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so now they're there, but it's like, honestly, when you think about it, they weren't really there from what I could tell, where they had a strong presence until 2020.
But I thought that they also pulled the Switch out from Brazil as well. Like they are no longer importing it themselves. It all is coming through like aftermarket imports now. because the sales in Brazil are so low for the Switch, like in box and all that. But on the gray market, obviously, it's probably much higher, but they don't have a way of tracking those numbers. And one of the big things too with like this gray market stuff is it's super interesting, and you'll see consoles out of box, and that's a very common thing for Brazil, like on how to purchase your consoles. You basically, if you're going to get a console and you want it to be affordable, you will buy it out of box. And the reason for that is because the shippers are able to put much more consoles onto into a shipping container whenever they don't have all the extra box and protection and all that stuff taking up space. So they're trying to make the price worthwhile as far as the resellers go by taking everything out of the box so they can actually have more inventory, because otherwise it would just cost way too much for them to bring over the amount of inventory that they need to, just to fulfill the sales that they have, which is kind of crazy to think about. So that's why like these numbers that the companies are looking at are so skewed, because most of the sales are going through the gray markets and the aftermarket sales, right? The out of box sales. So they have no real way of actually gauging that, right? So like it makes the numbers in different countries, like someone who's selling in Brazil might go to America, buy everything up, right? And then take everything out of the box and then ship it over to Brazil. But the thing is that those purchases are now like in America, right? So those numbers are now inflated, whereas Brazil's numbers are deflated. And that's why Nintendo ended up pulling out imports to Brazil. So it's kind of like a weird system going on where it almost feels like they're kind of hindering their own selves, but because the prices are so high, they had to do this workaround. So it's a tough, touchy subject there.
Yeah, I don't know. I just always found it interesting. I had a friend back in the the MSN era, like AIM.
Showing our age.
Yeah, seriously. Back when goofing around on message boards was the thing before like Twitter and Reddit. I used to talk to someone out there quite a bit, and it was always interesting because I would talk about games, and it's like we never really talked about the same games because like their experience was almost totally different than mine, and it was fascinating. I found so many games I never really thought I'd heard about because I didn't really grow up with Sega. Mm-hmm. So it's just interesting how it's like I don't want to say a parallel world, because I feel like everything I did research on about this all said that, mm-hmm. But it really does feel like that. And I mean, nowadays with modern gaming, it's a little different, especially with indie titles, because it's easier to access, I guess. Mm-hmm. Being able to access from a phone or from a computer might actually be a little bit cheaper than a console.
Well, not just cheaper for the consumer, but cheaper for the developers as well.
Yep.
So one of the things that really fascinates me about this is, okay, so you bring up the idea that, we were able to play games like Gran Turismo or Need for Speed on Sega, right? Like, and like, that's such an amazing concept to me. The fact that they're able to push that console so far to potentially play, a couple generations later games on those consoles. They're working with what they have. And I think that really speaks to the type of games that are actually coming out in Brazil right now. Like their indie market is huge. It's massive. Their pixel art stuff is beautiful. It's gorgeous. And it's because they're using the tools that are available to them. A lot of pixel art creators or generators are free, right? And a lot of these indie studios are using the free resources that are available to them right now because they don't have the money to dump into dev kits and things like that. Dev kits are super expensive, and it's not even a fruitful endeavor for them to go through because the people of Brazil don't have those consoles, the newest consoles. So why would they spend the money on those dev kits, right? Like they're looking for a global hit before they even branch out into potentially going to the newer generation consoles. And then even then, a lot of that stuff, the porting over is being done somewhere else, right? Like whenever they pair up with a console itself. So it is really interesting that like and fascinating, and I love it because, you know, the creativity of Brazil itself is just amazing to me, that they're able to accomplish such gorgeous things using the assets that are available to them. Whenever we have, you know, games that are running on the best 3D engines out here, they're supposed to be the most beautiful games ever in existence, and then they completely crash and burn when they come out. Thinking, you know, like Cyberpunk, right? That game is gorgeous, but it has so many bugs and issues because they're trying to chase that dragon almost, right? They're trying to push everything because, you know, with games being developed out here, we have access to every tool possible. So then a lot of games end up going into that spiral of, oh, this new software just came out, let's port everything over to that, and then bugs and issues come from it. But then when you look at Brazil, they know what tools they have. They know how to use them well and excellently, actually. Like, they're masters at their craft with the tools that they currently have, and they're able to just focus in on making a great product. And it really does shine in the games that come out of Brazil. Like, it's insane to see some of this pixel art because it's gorgeous. It really is gorgeous. And the games themselves are very interesting and exciting to play, but they're not, because they're not being bogged down by the newest software, the newest tech that's coming out, right? They're making games for themselves. Like, it almost feels like every single game that comes out is a passion project, and you really feel the passion of the designers shining through their games. It's amazing to see.
It's crazy. Like, I don't know. I was just kind of actually looking over a list of, like, over time, like how kind of games have evolved over there, and it's fascinating, you know. And thinking about some of these games that have come out recently, I mean, honestly, I didn't know half of these came from there, and it's just the visuals. I'm like, wow, like, it's, I don't know, it's beautiful. Like,
well, like, for instance, right? So when we talk about, like, think about this game, right? This game was not developed in Brazil per se, but the artwork came from Brazil, which is pretty amazing. So Celeste is an amazing title that is globally loved, right? And one of the big things that people talk about when they look at Celeste is the artwork. How much, like, it's a great experience, not just to play it, but to look at it as well. And come to find out that the artwork was actually done by a company in Brazil. Like, that's crazy to think about, right? So, I mean, Celeste was made by a North American company, Matt Makes Games, but the actual artwork was actually made by a Brazilian group called Miniboss, right? And it's just crazy to think that, like the game, I guess, like, the game industry itself knows that Brazil is experts at this pixel art. Like, they know their craft and they know they're good at it. So they're utilizing Brazil as a way to get amazing looking titles. And that's just one indie game that's, while not in Brazil specifically developed, Brazil had a huge hand in making this game successful. Because if it didn't have that art, I don't think Celeste would have been as, I guess, noticed or watched or looked at, right, as a amazing title, despite having a really great story behind it too.
Yeah, I think, like, for me, the graphics really make, like, a good 50% of that game for me. Like, I love the story, and, like, the platforming, music. I mean, honestly, everything about it was great, but the artwork really tied it together more than I felt any other kind of platformer has done. Really, like, the graphics pulled me in initially, and then made me want to keep playing the game, which I feel a lot of times with pixel graphics, I don't really get that too often.
No, it's very rare, I would say. But whenever you look at the list of games that come out from Brazil, it's amazing to see how many of those pixel graphics, like, really pull you in, right? It's the first thing you look at and you're like, holy crap, this game looks amazing. But it's because they're masters at their craft. They really know how to handle it. And one title that I think is a really great example of them being masters of the craft as far as pixel art goes is Dandara, Trials of Fear, right? Like that game is gorgeous to look at, and it has a really great story. The gameplay mechanics are really, really clean and simple, but it was designed to be a mobile experience because they're trying to, like, that's the easiest thing to actually design for is mobile games. So once again, they're taking their tools that they have that they know that they can make an excellent product out of and just focusing purely on that. And one thing, too, that's really cool about Dandara, which I thought was really fascinating, I didn't know about it, but Dandara is a real person in Brazil. She was a freedom fighter, basically. She fought to help free slaves in Brazil, and they actually decided to make a game revolving around her. Now, obviously, the game doesn't go into the exploits that she went through and all that, but they're just using her as a main character, like in a much more like fantastical light. And that kind of goes into something I want to talk about too, where in previous episodes we talked, like especially in Mexico, where they focused a lot on culture in a lot of their games, right? And when we were doing the research on South America as well, I started noticing a difference between the way that Mexico was handling games and the way that South America and even Brazil are handling their games, where their culture isn't really a driving force behind it, right? And a lot of the games that are coming out, these amazing indie titles, are much more fantastical in nature, right? It's a full escapism once again. Remember, I mentioned it as well with like Carnival and all that stuff, like the festivals that they throw. Their whole like background or premise or idea of life is escapism, because they don't want to, relive what they're doing right now, right? Like they want to travel to unknown worlds and all that. And that's where these indie titles are getting a lot of their inspiration from and why they are so vast and out there, right? And just kind of much more interesting, I would say, and less culture focused, right?
Yeah.
And one of the big driving forces behind that is the fact that whenever a game does have strong cultural ties to Brazil itself, the sales in Brazil specifically are very, very low. And a lot of these indie developers, their primary market is Brazil because it's hard for them to get out in the world, right? To get global recognition. So it I think one of the game designers said that like whenever we make a game that has Brazil as the focus, about 10% of the sales are actually from Brazil. The other 90 are from the rest of the world. So how crazy is that to think that, right? Like the rest of the world is fascinated and intrigued by Brazilian culture, but the Brazilians themselves are like, well, I don't care about that, right? Like they're showing it with their money. Like they might, in interviews and stuff, they might say that they do care about their culture and it's very important to them. But based on the sales, it's not as important as they might or make it seem, right? If that makes sense. So that's why a lot of the games that are coming out of here have less cultural focus than other countries like Mexico, for instance.
Yeah, I kind of noticed that because when we were talking about this episode, I was trying to look for, modern games that have like a background, like how we have with Mexico. And it was almost impossible. I was surprised because, for future episodes of this where we go around the world, a couple of the countries I've looked at, I've been able to find, games with cultural roots and backgrounds and display history. But Brazil was like the only one I really couldn't find anything about. And I'm like, But hearing what you say, it makes total sense why, and for the most part, I can see why any country would really feel that way. It's, you've grown up with your culture all your life. You do want to, and when you want to play a game, you want to escape. Most people want to escape when they play games,
right?
But yeah, like some of the titles I found, it's like definitely out there, right? Fantastical. And like there was one I played not too long ago called Virgo versus the Zodiac, which is a turn-based RPG. I'm trying to think of the style of turn-based. I think it's more so just your typical turn-based. It's not really like anything like crazy different mechanics, but it's very pretty. It's kind of got the soft pixel, kind of like that pastel goth kind of look to it, like purple and teal. Like it's very pretty game, and I enjoyed my little time with it that I had played when I did. And looking at some of their other titles too. Another game that really stuck out to me when I first played it was Momodora, Reverie Under the Moonlight. And it's kind of like a Metroidvania. It's definitely a platforming action. And it's interesting because I never knew either of these games came from there. It's just, honestly, most of the time when I play a game, I never really thought about the background. And nowadays I do, because it makes games even more interesting to me. And I really enjoyed this game a lot. I didn't get to beat it, because usually I never get to finish my games, but I loved it. And this is coming from someone who plays a lot of Metroidvanias. I thought this game was really good, and I feel like it didn't get as much praise as it should have. At least like how a lot of these styles of games always get hyped up. It was one of those that kind of just was there, and I think like in certain communities it got big, but it's not like Hollow Knight, like, or it's everyone knows it, right? But
that one also had the funding to, actually get into dev kits early so they can get early exposure into different things. Whereas in Brazilian market, they don't have those dev kits available, right? So it's a little harder to break out. So yeah, it makes sense.
And there's two more I want to talk about before we get kind of into our big developer. To me, I think these two games probably are the most recent ones that I know kind of reached a mainstream success. I know Horizon Chase Turbo was a very popular indie racing game, and I've played it. I really liked it. I grew up with, Top Gear and Outrun, and this game is literally that, just 3D, the typical 3D indie look, and it's freaking awesome. For a racing game, if you're into those kind of arcade ones, this game is good. I really, really like this one a lot. And then this is a game I just picked up.
It really reminds me of like Cruising USA.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, it does. Oh God, I love that game too. Now this is a title I just picked up, but I've had multiple friends praise it, saying it's like a game that I truly love a lot and hold dear to my heart. But the game is called Kaze and the Wild Masks. It's another platforming game, and everyone I've spoke to about this says it's like Donkey Kong Country, which is one of my favorite games. And from what I've seen and from watching other friends play it, it literally captures that same feeling down to the music, which is crazy. And the pixel art looks really good in this game. And it's good seeing how positively it was received. And I'm actually really excited to play this because it comes in a few days, and I need a distraction from Elden Ring. And it just looks amazing. So I'm excited to play that one. I'll let everyone know how it is too.
Nice. Yeah. All right. So I think it's time for us to dive into the big developer of today. So Behold Studios, this is probably one of the most successful studios to come out of Brazil, and they make some amazing, amazing indie titles. If you've ever played games like Knights of Pen and Paper or Chroma Squad, like those games are so much fun. There's so much humor behind them, but you can just really feel the nostalgia ties to them, right? And they're gorgeous to look at, super entertaining to play. Knights of Pen and Paper was amazing to me. It really, when I found it, I was just kind of having my, I guess I would call it like my renaissance period with Dungeons and Dragons. And I was really falling in love with that concept again. And then I see Knights of Pen and Paper, where it's just taking Dungeons and Dragons to a whole nother level. It's bringing it digitally. It's like bringing that experience to the mobile devices, which now you can get it on other consoles as well, but mobile game first. And it was so much fun, right? Like this game's great. Like even the way that the characters are presented to you, where everyone is sitting at a table in the foreground of the screen itself. You're the only person's face that you really see is the DM, right? So like you really get like almost like a POV shot of you playing Dungeons and Dragons with your friends sitting at the table again, right? Like it's really, really nice touch there. And then once again, the humor behind all of it is really great. Doesn't take itself too seriously, but that seems to be a very common thing with Behold Studios themselves. Like they're very comical. They're very like, let's not take ourselves too seriously. And they're blowing up. Like, and this is a really great, I guess, like almost like Cinderella story, right? For a game design studio, right? So Behold Studios is becoming really, really huge. And now they're starting to branch out into other avenues where they have the new game that just came out of Space, which is a departure from their typical look, right? So this one's actually full 3D, but it's a very well-made game and very fun to play as well. But it's just showing that, like, with their success, they are branching out just like any other game studio would do, especially here in the States, right? Whereas maybe if this Behold was in the States, their first game would have looked more like Out of Space, opposed to maybe the Knights and Pen and Papers and the Chroma Squads. But they were using the tools that they had available to them at that time to create their passion projects, right? And even in their newest installment of the Pen and Paper series, the Galaxies of Pen and Paper, there is some like 3D assets available there too during spacecraft battles. So it's basically think D&D mixed with Star Trek, like just ultimate experience there, right? And it's really, really cool to see like this game company progress and actually see like where they came from and where they're going. And it's really, really cool.
Oh yeah. I love Knights of Pen and Paper. I remember playing it on my phone first and then playing it on Steam later once the Deluxe Year Edition came out. And I loved the game. You know, as someone who I like D&D, but I ain't got time for that. You know, like, but it's always something like to enjoy, to listen to, or, jump in for a few sessions and then jump out, stuff like that. This game was just like so much fun to me. And like you said, it didn't take it too seriously. And I loved the little cameos of other games that it would get thrown in there. And it was a lot of fun, and Galaxy of Pen and Paper, I only started a little bit of, but I really liked it too. I think I was actually kind of enjoying that one a little bit more just because I like space a lot. And I think there was a sequel to Knights of Pen and Paper.
Yeah, there's Knights of Pen and Paper 2 as well.
Yeah, I remember playing a little bit of that. And then, I don't know, I think because I played so much of the first, I was a little burnt out by it.
It was basically the first one, just more polished, right? A little bit extra thrown in. So you can tell that they had a good success on their hands and they wanted to continue that success. But I think probably the one that really got me to fall in love with Behold Studios, while I did really enjoy Knights of Pen and Paper and it was a great introduction, was Chroma Squad. Chroma Squad is fantastic. It's a little tactical game, but it's so funny to play this game because it is a Power Rangers rip, right? Like they are not holding back at all with how much of a parody this is of Power Rangers, where you even are playing as actors on a set, right? And it's just so interesting to see this stuff. And like the costumes are hilarious. Like in the early stages, you literally have like a bucket on your head that you can tell that like, oh, they didn't have the budget for regular costumes. So they just made what they had, which I love because it really takes you back to some of like the early Power Ranger stuff where it's like, okay, that costume looks janky, right? And it's super, super fun to see. And just the writing is brilliant. The character designs are fantastic. The battle system's really, really cool. Like they even have like joint battle systems similar to like your Chrono Triggers, right? If you have characters within a certain squares of each other, then they perform, joint attacks and stuff like that. If you have the whole team together, then you can do a big attack. Like there's a lot of really fun things with this title. And like I said, Behold Studios is a fantastic little group that they just know how to make a really entertaining product without being too, I guess, serious is the best way to put it, right?
Yeah, I loved Chroma Squad a lot. I think, like you said, it was kind of the game that stood out the most out of anything I played from them, just because I also really love tactical RPGs like that. And it was cool seeing, the differences in the costumes and the settings and everything as your company, got more money. And it was, I don't know, I freaking love that. Like it captured what I really wanted from a tactical game at the perfect time.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, like when I think about indie strategy RPGs, like in the tactics vein, I think it's definitely up there, like in the top of my list. I mean, there are a lot of good strategy RPGs that are indie, but this one it had enough to be different, and it did it well, and it was just fun. It wasn't drawn out. It wasn't like, oh, here's 20 different classes and you get overwhelmed. Like, no, this is like, you're here, you're a Power Ranger, and you're gonna kick ass. And I think to me that stands out more than spending an hour trying to figure out what team I'm gonna put out and what classes should I min max. Like it was a perfect little bite-sized snack, and I loved it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And another thing too that's great about this title is in the game you actually get to change, like, one thing, it's called studio options, right? So like you start building up your base, which is your studio itself, and you can actually change everything from like the squad name, the robot, the mecha name, how you call the mecha, even the finishing move shout, right? So you can type in whatever you want, which is just adding to the humor and adding to the fact that like this is meant to be played, enjoyed, and just have fun with it, right? It's not meant to be a very serious tactical RPG, which most tactical games are very serious in nature. Like, look at your Final Fantasy Tactics. Even Triangle Strategy now. Like, it is very serious concepts going on. And, like, they're not going to let you basically scream, like, it's punching time, right? Whenever something big is going to happen. But that's something you could do in Chroma Squad just to add to the humor. So you can add your own personal sense of humor into this title as well, on top of the already clever writing that's involved in this title. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on this little excursion into Brazil as we travel around the world through video games. And we are excited to bring you the next installments, probably in a couple weeks as well. But it's going to be a lot of fun, and who knows where we are going to end up next. But yeah, once again, thank you all for listening, and we will catch you next week with our next exciting episode. Bye.
Bye.